United States government and politics. The United States is the world's oldest surviving federation. It is a representative democracy, in which majority rule is tempered by minority rights protected by law. The government is regulated by a system of checks and balances defined by the U.S. Constitution, which serves as the country's supreme legal document. For 2016, the U.S. ranked 21st on the Democracy Index, tied with Italy, and 18th on the Corruption Perceptions Index. In the American federalist system, citizens are usually subject to three levels of government: federal, state, and local. The local government's duties are commonly split between county and municipal governments. In almost all cases, executive and legislative officials are elected by a plurality vote of citizens by district. There is no proportional representation at the federal level, and it is rare at lower levels. The federal government is composed of three branches. Legislative: the bicameral Congress, made up of the Senate and the House of Representatives, makes federal law, declares war, approves treaties, has the power of the purse, and has the power of impeachment, by which it can remove sitting members of the government. Executive: the President is the commander-in-chief of the military, can veto legislative bills before they become law, subject to congressional override, and appoints the members of the cabinet, subject to Senate approval, and other officers, who administer and enforce federal laws and policies. Judicial: the Supreme Court and lower federal courts, whose judges are appointed by the President with Senate approval, interpret laws and overturn those they find unconstitutional. The House of Representatives has 435 voting members, each representing a congressional district for a 2-year term. House seats are apportioned among the states by population every 10th year. At the 2010 census, 7 states had the minimum of 1 representative, while California, the most populous state, had 53. The District of Columbia and the 5 major U.S. territories each have 1 member of Congress. These members are not allowed to vote. The Senate has 100 members, with each state having 2 senators, elected at large to 6-year terms. 1/3 of Senate seats are up for election every other year. The District of Columbia and the 5 major U.S. territories do not have senators. The President serves a 4-year term and may be elected to the office no more than twice. The President is not elected by direct vote, but by an indirect electoral college system in which the determining votes are apportioned to the states and the District of Columbia. The Supreme Court, led by the Chief Justice of the United States, has 9 members, who serve for life. The state governments are structured in roughly similar fashion. Nebraska uniquely has a unicameral legislature. The governor, chief executive, of each state is directly elected. Some state judges and cabinet officers are appointed by the governors of the respective states, while others are elected by popular vote. The original text of the Constitution establishes the structure and responsibilities of the federal government and its relationship with the individual states. Article 1 protects the right to the great writ of habeas corpus. The Constitution has been amended 27 times. The first 10 amendments, which make up the Bill of Rights, and the 14th Amendment form the central basis of Americans' individual rights. All laws and governmental procedures are subject to judicial review, and any law ruled by the courts to be in violation of the Constitution is voided. The principle of judicial review, not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution, was established by the Supreme Court in Marbury v. Madison, 1803, in a decision handed down by Chief Justice John Marshall. Political divisions. The United States is a federal republic of 50 states, a federal district, 5 territories and several uninhabited island possessions. The states and territories are the principal administrative districts in the country. These are divided into subdivisions of counties and independent cities. The District of Columbia is a federal district that contains the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C. The states and the District of Columbia choose the President of the United States. Each state has presidential electors equal to the number of their representatives and senators in Congress. The District of Columbia has 3, because of the 23rd Amendment. Territories of the United States such as Puerto Rico do not have presidential electors, and so people in those territories cannot vote for the president. Congressional districts are reapportioned among the states following each decennial census of population. Each state then draws single-member districts to conform with the census apportionment. The total number of voting representatives is 435. There are also 6 non-voting representatives who represent the District of Columbia and the 5 major U.S. territories. The United States also observes tribal sovereignty of the American Indian nations to a limited degree, as it does with the state's sovereignty. American Indians are U.S. citizens and tribal lands are subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. Congress and the federal courts. Like the states, they have a great deal of autonomy, but also like the states, tribes are not allowed to make war, engage in their own foreign relations, or print and issue currency. Citizenship is granted at birth in all states, the District of Columbia, and all major U.S. territories except American Samoa. Parties and elections. The United States has operated under a two-party system for most of its history. For elective offices at most levels, state-administered primary elections choose the major party nominees for subsequent general elections. Since the general election of 1856, the major parties have been the Democratic Party, founded in 1824, and the Republican Party, founded in 1854. Since the Civil War, only one third-party presidential candidate, former President Theodore Roosevelt, running as a progressive in 1912, has won as much as 20% of the popular vote. The president and vice president are elected through the Electoral College system. Within American political culture, the center-right Republican Party is considered conservative and the center-left Democratic Party is considered liberal. The states of the Northeast and West Coast and some of the Great Lakes states, known as blue states, are relatively liberal. The red states of the South and parts of the Great Plains and Rocky Mountains are relatively conservative. Republican Donald Trump, the winner of the 2016 presidential election, is serving as the 45th President of the United States. Leadership in the Senate includes Republican Vice President Mike Pence, Republican President pro tempore Orrin Hatch, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Leadership in the House includes Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, and Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. In the 115th United States Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate are controlled by the Republican Party. The Senate consists of 51 Republicans and 47 Democrats with 2 independents who caucus with the Democrats. The House consists of 241 Republicans and 194 Democrats. In state governorships, there are 33 Republicans, 16 Democrats, and 1 independent. Among the D.C. mayor and the 5 territorial governors, there are 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat, 1 New Progressive, and 2 independents. Foreign relations. The United States has an established structure of foreign relations. It is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council and New York City is home to the United Nations headquarters. It is a member of the G7, G20, and Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Almost all countries have embassies in Washington, D.C., and many have consulates around the country. Likewise, nearly all nations host American diplomatic missions. However, Iran, North Korea, Bhutan, and the Republic of China, Taiwan, do not have formal diplomatic relations with the United States, although the U.S. still maintains unofficial relations with Taiwan and supplies it with military equipment. The United States has a special relationship with the United Kingdom and strong ties with Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Israel, and several European Union countries, including France, Italy, Germany, and Spain. It works closely with fellow NATO members on military and security issues and with its neighbors through the Organization of American States and free trade agreements such as the Trilateral North American Free Trade Agreement with Canada and Mexico. In 2008, the United States spent a net $25.4 billion on official development assistance, the most in the world. As a share of America's large gross national income, GNI, however, the U.S. contribution of 0.18% ranked last among 22 donor states. By contrast, private overseas giving by Americans is relatively generous. The U.S. exercises full international defense authority and responsibility for 3 sovereign nations through Compact of Free Association with Micronesia, the Marshall Islands and Palau. These are Pacific Island nations, once part of the U.S.-administered Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands after World War II, which gained independence in subsequent years. On October 25, 2017, Vice President Mike Pence announced at a In Defense of Christians annual dinner meeting in Washington that the United States would stop funding United Nations relief efforts, cases tackling the persecution of Christians in the Middle East, but insisted that the U.S. would instead help and aid Christians directly through the United States Agency for International Development. Pence said that he will be visiting the Middle East in December and will meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to discuss peace agreements. Government finance. Taxes in the United States are levied at the federal, state, and local government levels. These include taxes on income, payroll, property, sales, imports, estates and gifts, as well as various fees. Taxation in the United States is based on citizenship, not residency. Both non-resident citizens and green card holders living abroad are taxed on their income irrespective of where they live or where their income is earned. It is the only country in the world, other than Eritrea, to do so. In 2010, taxes collected by federal, state and municipal governments amounted to 24.8% of GDP. During FY 2012, the federal government collected approximately $2.45 trillion in tax revenue, up $147 billion or 6% versus FY 2011 revenues of $2.30 trillion. Primary receipt categories included individual income taxes, $1,132 billion or 47%, Social Security/social insurance taxes, $845 billion or 35%, and corporate taxes, $242 billion or 10%. Based on CBO estimates, under 2013 tax law, the top 1% will be paying the highest average tax rates since 1979, while other income groups will remain at historic lows. U.S. taxation has historically been generally progressive, especially the federal income taxes, though by most measures it became noticeably less progressive after 1980. It has sometimes been described as among the most progressive in the developed world, but this characterization is controversial. The highest 10% of income earners pay a majority of federal taxes, and about half of all taxes. Payroll taxes for Social Security are a flat regressive tax, with no tax charged on income above $118,500 for 2015 and 2016. And no tax at all paid on unearned income from things such as stocks and capital gains. The historic reasoning for the regressive nature of the payroll tax is that entitlement programs have not been viewed as welfare transfers. However, according to the Congressional Budget Office, the net effect of Social Security is that the benefit-to-tax ratio ranges from roughly 70% for the top earnings quintile to about 170% for the lowest earning quintile, making the system progressive. The top 10% paid 51.8% of total federal taxes in 2009, and the top 1%, with 13.4% of pre-tax national income, paid 22.3% of federal taxes. In 2013, the Tax Policy Center projected total federal effective tax rates of 35.5% for the top 1%, 27.2% for the top quintile, 13.8% for the middle quintile, and -2.7% for the bottom quintile. The incidence of corporate income tax has been a matter of considerable ongoing controversy for decades. State and local taxes vary widely, but are generally less progressive than federal taxes as they rely heavily on broadly borne regressive sales and property taxes that yield less volatile revenue streams, though their consideration does not eliminate the progressive nature of overall taxation. During FY 2012, the federal government spent $3.54 trillion on a budget or cash basis, down $60 billion or 1.7% versus FY 2011 spending of $3.60 trillion. Major categories of FY 2012 spending included Medicare and Medicaid, $802 billion or 23% of spending, Social Security, $768 billion or 22%, Defense Department, $670 billion or 19%, non-defense discretionary, $615 billion or 17%, other mandatory, $461 billion or 13%, and interest, $223 billion or 6%. The total national debt of the United States in the United States was $18.527 trillion, 106% of the GDP, in 2014. Military. The President holds the title of Commander-in-Chief of the nation's armed forces and appoints its leaders, the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The United States Department of Defense administers the armed forces, including the Army, Marine Corps, Navy, and Air Force. The Coast Guard is run by the Department of Homeland Security in peacetime and by the Department of the Navy during times of war. In 2008, the armed forces had 1.4 million personnel on active duty. The Reserves and National Guard brought the total number of troops to 2.3 million. The Department of Defense also employed about 700,000 civilians, not including contractors. Military service is voluntary, though conscription may occur in wartime through the selective service system. American forces can be rapidly deployed by the Air Force's large fleet of transport aircraft, the Navy's 11 active aircraft carriers, and Marine expeditionary units at sea with the Navy's Atlantic and Pacific fleets. The military operates 865 bases and facilities abroad, and maintains deployments greater than 100 active duty personnel in 25 foreign countries. The military budget of the United States in 2011 was more than $700 billion. 41% of global military spending and equal to the next 14 largest national military expenditures combined. At 4.7% of GDP, the rate was the second highest among the top 15 military spenders, after Saudi Arabia. U.S. defense spending as a percentage of GDP ranked 23rd globally in 2012 according to the CIA. Defense's share of U.S. spending has generally declined in recent decades, from Cold War peaks of 14.2% of GDP in 1953 and 69.5% of federal outlays in 1954 to 4.7% of GDP and 18.8% of federal outlays in 2011. The proposed base Department of Defense budget for 2012, $553 billion, was a 4.2% increase over 2011. An additional $118 billion was proposed for the military campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. The last American troops serving in Iraq departed in December 2011. 4,484 service members were killed during the Iraq War. Approximately 90,000 U.S. troops were serving in Afghanistan in April 2012. By November 8, 2013, 2,285 had been killed during the war in Afghanistan.